Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host, Mike Reid. We're here with BK Marcus, editor of the Freeman, and tonight we're celebrating the Freeman magazine's Winter 2015 issue, The Circus in the Cage. Now, as you may have noticed, our esteemed guest is the famous libertarian, classical liberal professor and author of the new book, Hayek's Modern Family, the one and only Dr. Steve Horwitz. Dr. Horwitz is the Charles Dana Professor of Economics at St. Lawrence, and he's also an affiliate scholar at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And tonight we want to talk about the whole Freeman magazine, and also especially about Steve's great article, why politicians keep giving us reasons to use the F word. The F word in this case is fascism. That really fits, I think, with the theme the Freeman magazine was going for in this Winter 2015 issue. Could you tell me a little bit about this issue? It's called The Circus in the Cage. It's got this beautiful, got a tattooed lady on the cover. Can you tell me about that theme?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite covers of a series of great new covers on the Quarterly Freeman. Max Borders, who this is his farewell issue. Mm-hmm. As editor of the Freeman, he wrote this fantastic note from the editor up front describing the theme of our features here, and he basically, seeing the campaign season kicking up a year early, quotes Mencken. You don't happen to have it with you, do you?
Yeah, I've got it. I can read it out. The whole thing, it's only about 300 words long. It's about a few minutes. So he quotes Mencken. He opens up. This is the note from the editor that comes right at the beginning of The Circus and the Cage, the new issue of the Freeman. It says, "Democracy is the art and science of running the circus from the monkey cage," said H.L. Mencken. So as we move into an election year, we wanted to remind our readers that the circus is getting bigger, and we, the monkeys, are howling and hurling feces like never before. It's really classic Max Porter's voice. Could it be due to the sudden and scary brown shirt tactics of Donald Trump, who, far from being establishment Republican, is more like a cross between Bernie Sanders and Bernie Madoff? Yeah. Or is it the sudden rise and scary red shirt tactics of Sanders himself, who is just as happy as Trump to keep out the foreigners who can continue to grow the welfare state? Then there's Hillary Clinton, with her secrecy and her Machiavellian will. She seems for now to just be sitting back and watching the entire spectacle unfold from some dark bower on K Street, waiting for her party's coronation. It's a spectacle, a circus. So when we look around again, it's clear that our friends and neighbors are the ones that are making this all possible, and that's the scary thought. Someone put that Feel the Burn sticker on her car, another person doffs his Trump hat with his hand over his heart. Actually, a few weeks ago, Will Riccardella on the Unbiased America show on Liberty.me actually had a Trump hat. I hasten to say the Trump hat was worn ironically, but it was nonetheless jarring. So I just want to finish with the last of this editor's note, this great kind of farewell note from Max Borders to the Freeman. So what are the rest of us monkeys to do? Watching it all unfold can seem like watching a reality show. We can get sucked in, trading barbs on social media and watching the horse race with a bucket full of popcorn and a vague look of disgust, or we can at least acknowledge the cage. If we succumb to the tribal tendencies, the bumper sticker rationales, and the I voted rectitude, will help perpetuate the whole charade. Each dangling chat will be a vote of complicity in this monstrous thing that has grown up on the backs of the people and that they paradoxically seem to welcome. Or we can be revolutionaries again. We can rattle the cage. A million little acts of civil disobedience here and there can add up fast. At the very least, we can call this thing what it is: a show, an illusion, a circus.
That's one of my favorite editor's notes, and this is one of my favorite themes. And I have to say, as I entered more consciously into the liberty movement, I thought of myself as very anti-political. I thought that this was a way to move away from all this nonsense, and sometimes a little bit disappointed by how much time we spend talking about campaigns and candidates. A great exception to that is Steve's article. He talks about Trump and Sanders in exactly the way that I find most fascinating, most compelling, and most useful.
Yeah, well, thanks, first of all. And yeah, I think seeing them as phenomena, right? Seeing them as not as a horse race, right? Not as a sports contest, not as blue team versus red team, and even at that, they mix up those things in a whole bunch of interesting ways. yeah, I think, and I think it's about, if we want to rattle that cage, we have to also understand what that cage is, and what these people represent, and what they're standing for, and really why, despite all of the attempts to divide us, red, blue, and all of those different ways, at the end, most of the folks who are running for office buy into all the same fundamental ideas, and certainly with Sanders and Trump, we have extreme examples of that. How what looks like two very different people are in fact coming from many of the same general principles and many of the same basic tenets, and that adds up to something that has its roots, as the article argues, in the fascism of the 1920s and 30s.
So to anticipate an objection that, Mike, I saw you talking about on Facebook, fascism is one of these words that's thrown around really easily.
Yep.
And often very misleadingly. Did you know Hans Sennholz?
I did not. I never knew Hans personally, but certainly, a number of his students are very good friends of mine. And in fact, I'm giving, I think it's titled the Hans Sennholz Memorial Lecture at Michigan State University in March, the second annual one. There's an annual lecture there now. So yeah, I certainly know of Hans, but yeah. So go ahead.
Well, excellent. Hans was Ludwig von Mises's first PhD student in the United States, and he was the president of FEE for a while. And I was trying to track down where I had read this story, and failed to earlier today. But Hans Sennholz at Grove City College apparently was at one point in the 1960s protested by the students for teaching free market economics, and they specifically called him a fascist.
Well, yes, and my understanding, right, and BK, you probably know this better than I, he was a Luftwaffe pilot at one point, I believe.
He had been a German soldier in World War II, drafted. Yes. Yep. But I'm not sure that it was his personal history they were referring to.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it wasn't, but it certainly made it, if they knew that, it made it a little more plausible.
Made it easier to hurl the epithet. Well, but my understanding is in the 60s they were hurling it left and right.
Yeah, as it were. And yes, and we still, I think libertarians still get that epithet thrown at us. And again, I think, and as I'm thinking on my feet here a bit, but it seems to me there's two interesting things about that. One, it is a product of people being unable to think outside the simple left-right, right? So it's the perception is that libertarians are very far to the right, therefore we must be fascist because that's what's very far to the right. And libertarians are going to say, no, guys, if you want to go one way, it's actually a circle, and if you go far enough each way, you get Trump and Sanders right around the other side. But I also think, we have to ask ourselves the question, and this is a whole other topic that I'm interested in, about why we're perceived as being on the right, and the way in which we talk about the things that we do, and understanding. I have a talk on classical liberalism's progressive heritage where I talk a lot about this, but sort of, while it is understandable in the 20th century that we allied ourselves, as libertarians did, as anti-socialists, with the right, that world's gone, it seems to me, and I think we have to do more to unbundle ourselves from the right. One of the weird, and we can take this back to the Trump phenomenon, I think one of the weirdest things to see is the number, and it's not a huge number, but it's not zero either, of former Ron Paul supporters who are now going for Trump, right? And I think that doesn't reflect the flaw in Ron Paul, rather a flaw in those voters in what they saw in Ron Paul and what they thought they saw in Ron Paul. But I do think that, again, Ron and sections of the libertarian movement, talk in ways that open ourselves up to these kinds of charges, and we have to just be really, really careful about that. Even though it remains true that a freedom-loving philosophy and fascism have little to do with each other.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but your introduction to Ron Paul actually, your introduction to libertarianism was in watching the debates and being attracted to this man who said what no one else up there dared to say. And if I had to guess, I would say that would be the connection between Trump and Ron Paul. Some people are simply attracted to that maverick voice.
Yeah. And I would just add that the difference, I think, is that Ron Paul's maverick voice was a voice at the level of ideas. I mean, say what you want. I have my disagreements with Ron Paul, but there's no doubt that Ron Paul is a man of ideas and principle, and there's a consistency, and he had a message, and it was like, I'm going to give you my message, and I'm going to hope that my message is so clear and strong that people will follow me, will come with me. And and Trump is much more of a panderer. And here's a guy doesn't have a political conception in his body, right? He's just saying he's emoting in a way that Ron Paul was thinking. If Ron Paul was the thinking version, Trump is the emoting version of this, right? And there's a piece going around this week on Facebook and other places, and I'm trying to think where it was from. I think it was from Daily Caller, maybe somewhere. Anyway, sort of making the point that what Trump is really attracting is the PC backlash, or the anti-PC backlash, right? That Trump is about people. They don't care what he's saying. They just care that he's pokey. He has become I hate using this kind of rhetoric, but a voice for the silenced, or the people who perceive they've been silenced.
Right. He's angering all the right people.
Right. That's right. And who cares what his positive positions are? Right. He's poked the right people, and that's a really, as sympathetic as I might be at times to what he's to the theater of it. Right. It's a terrible development if we care about liberty. That's what anyone, not Ron Paul supporters or anyone, it's not anyone finds that to be the way you want to deal. It illustrates the point that Max is making about the circus here, right? We're at that level of craziness, and then on the other side we got Sanders, who doesn't even know what ATM charges are and doesn't understand an uncollateralized loan, trying to tell us how we're going to fix the economy, and again, emoting and telling people what a different group of people what they want to hear too.
But the common thread, as you point out in the article, between Sanders and Trump is not just the emoting, but a particular philosophy of nationalism.
That's right. And the nation, for both of them, the nation comes first, right? I mean, this is why you've got, both of them skeptical of free trade and skeptical of open immigration, just for different perspectives, right? Sanders is worried about protecting workers, and Trump is the CEO trying to win for Team America, but they come to the same point, and the same point is that Americans count more than everyone else, and boy, that lays it out there in a way that other people haven't, that this is the thing that both sides have in common, especially when you push to the fringes. And it's such an opening for libertarians, for classical liberals, to step in and say, you know what? Everyone counts. Everyone counts the same. We don't have to go with all lives matter, but globally, right? Everybody counts the same. And I just, even today on Facebook, maybe it was yesterday, I don't know. One of my Facebook friends, for all I know, is watching this, but was somewhat horrified by Gary Johnson's open border stance, and I found that really interesting, because this is a guy who, this Facebook friend, is always talking about the decline of American families, particularly inner city families, and how terrible it is, and how we have to think about families. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Now you're going to shut off the opportunity for millions, billions of families, of the poorest families in the world, to improve their lives by even an adult comes over and remittances back to the family. I mean, you want to talk about how you destroy families, destroy their opportunity for upward mobility by shutting the border. So it just, I think we have such an opportunity to seize that issue intellectually, right? When you see these guys so nakedly pandering with this kind of nationalism. The sad part for me, or the scary part, maybe is a better word, is that it's working, right? And I do think there's, we can, part of our job, our sort of educational job as classical liberals, I think, is to keep hitting on this notion of the fact that so many Americans find the increasingly cosmopolitan United States to be this scary, threatening thing. Folks, it's not every immigrant is a card-carrying ISIS member, okay? It's and Trump played right into it with the Mexicans rape coming over. I mean, it's what's weird about it is it's like so many other issues where people say, well, yeah, of course, the immigrants I work with are great. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about these other ones.
Yeah.
But everyone's talking about, right? The same,
So those that have been sort of conjured up on the latest news scare.
Right.
Not
As if
you really know.
Right, as if native-born Americans never committed a crime, or. So, but that's the frustrating part to me, and and there's a deep at the bottom of all of that, I think, is what Hayek talked a lot about how the end is the wonderful stuff and why I'm not a conservative, right? About how classical liberalism is the party of change. We don't fear the future, right? We don't fear change. We're prepared to let change take its course. I mean, that's not a fatalism, but it's certainly a notion that somehow recognize we can't control the world, and if we set up the institutions right, change will happen in positive ways. And certainly I should note one of the themes of my book with respect to the family, but in general, right? That's the intellectual error here is fear of fear of the correct, in some sense, perception that nobody controls the social world, but the fear that that's a bad thing, and if we had someone controlling it, it would be better.
Right.
And both Bernie and Trump are going right into that.
So I'm guessing that most of the viewers are fairly sympathetic with, let's call it the more universalist position against the nationalist position we're describing these candidates. But I want to return to the F word.
Yeah.
And ask, why is fascism not just a legitimate term to use here, but why is it a useful word?
Well, I think I'm not sure which order to answer those in, but I think both of them, come back to the history and the origins of fascism. It's useful and it's accurate because it was in the 1920s and 30s the third way between socialism and capitalism. The perception at the time was that, well, okay, capitalism, of course, everybody knew capitalism was bad for all the usual reasons. But certainly one of some of the fears of socialism were seeing what was happening in Russia, and for some people seeing how bloody it was. But for others, it was the perception that Marxism was globalist, was internationalist, was cosmopolitan. And Marxian socialism said your class was what mattered, right? That the Italian worker has more in common with the German and Russian worker than the Italian worker has in common with the Italian capitalist. And for those in the early 20th century, and again, particularly in the aftermath of World War I, where nationalism was still running high, the idea, no, that's not right, right? And one of the arguments the early Italian fascists made was that socialism was about conflict. So was capitalism, of course, but socialism just created a different conflict, right? And that that whole dynamic of the Marxian story was workers versus owners conflict that tore nations apart. You got violence, you got bloodshed, you got all these sorts of things. What we needed, argued the fascists, was something that got these people to cooperate. And so you take that notion that socialism, capitalism, that whole Marxian dynamic is very violent, it tears societies apart. We want to preserve Italian society in the case of the 1920s. How do we do that? We say, okay, we don't want capitalism. We don't want people to just be able to, God forbid, do what they want under the rule of law. We don't want free markets, but we also don't want the kind of top-down socialism where one party, wipes out the other. What we want are the workers, the owners, the political representatives to all kind of come to the table together within a nation and decide kind of collectively what we're going to produce and how we're going to produce it. So we still have kind of nominal private ownership, but heavily, regulated and steered by this sort of collaboration between labor, capital, and politics. And that was the fascist vision, right? Of course, how do you make sure there's anything sensible that comes out of it? Power inevitably, worked its way up, and the people at the top, were the ones who decided among all of these sort of attempts at cooperation and cartelization what would actually happen. And so to go back to BK's question, I think it's useful because fascism was a real thing. We use it, as this epithet now, but before it was Nazism. And let's remember, the Nazis were National Socialists, the German National Socialist German Workers' Party, right? So National Socialist, right? There you go. And so I think it's not wrong to use that label, even though it has this horrific baggage that goes with it, that comes with the Nazis. And remember, the Italians didn't engage in that the racist and racism and genocide, at least not perhaps until the very end, and when they really started working more closely with the Nazis. But you read the literature of the Italian fascists, and there's none of that. It's about the economics of this. So it's an accurate historical term for it, and I think it's useful as a way to remind people that when you create systems of power in the ways that both Trump and Sanders want to do, it's inevitable that the worst will rise to the top, and that it's very likely that you'll get the Il Duce type figure at the top. Whether it's Trump or Sanders, you create those institutions of power, you're going to get that.
So, Steve, I haven't asked you about this before, but it occurs to me that another factor beyond wanting to protect the nation, and you know this history better than I do, but is a desire to protect some sense of the cultural status quo, that socialism was perceived as revolutionary and fascism was seen as the most likely way to protect the middle class, protect bourgeois culture.
Yes, there's certainly some of that, and I want to take that in a different direction in a second, but yes, I think both socialism was revolutionary and it was totalistic, right? It was, we're going to revolutionize the culture too. And if you think about what capitalism does, it's not this top-down conscious revolution, but economic interaction with people different than yourselves leads to cultural change, right? Again, another theme of my book, I'll note, as long as we're hitting on these things. But yeah, that you can't, if you're going to have a free market, you can't control the culture, right? The culture is going to change in ways that are completely unpredictable, that arise out of economic activity. This is, to go back, Virginia Pastrell's much overlooked 1999 book, and I'm blanking on the title, but the stasis versus dynamis distinction that she makes there is great, right? That we're classical liberals are dynamists. We accept that change, right? Including cultural change. And I think you're right, BK. That was the attempt, fascism was a way to try to hold on to that, all of the old history against what they saw as the revolution of socialism. The other direction I want to take that in, and this is one of the charges, and this goes back to the Hans Sennholz story too. These days, one way that libertarians sometimes get the fascism charge raised is there is this passage from Mises, right, where I think it's either in Human Action or Liberalism, maybe in Liberalism, where he says, something like, well, say what the fascists were terrible, but they did protect. I can't remember the exact language, but they did attempt to protect civilization against the socialist revolution, and we go, see, he's a fascist.
Right. He thought they were slightly less evil.
Slightly less evil, right? But I think he said that for many of the reasons you articulated at the outset of this little conversation, which is, I think Mises perceived their intent, at least anyway, as trying to hold on to something that the socialists, the communists, would have completely wiped out. Dealing with writers in an earlier era, and Mises foremost among them, you always have to contextualize what they're saying and remember the world that they were writing in. And the world, this was a guy with who the Nazis chased out of Germany, but who also spent his life fighting the socialists, if anybody knew, right? So he, in that context, you can perhaps understand why he would say that. But boy, yeah, it doesn't make our lives any easier when we have to start to talk about what. Remember what he meant. And again, what bothers me about those sort of things, and the Sennholz thing too, right, is to be unable to see the larger context, right, and to realize what people like that, the kind of freedom that they fought for, and then to label them that way, right. So yes, I think you're right though, BK. I think they were trying to. Fascism is a kind of stasis. It is deeply deeply fearful of change, of any kind of change, but certainly uncontrolled change. And man, it's interesting to think about it, right? Fascism wants to use political power to stop change. The left socialists want to use it to bring forward change. I hadn't really thought about it in quite those terms till this conversation. But yeah, that is a way to think about it.
So we have the internationalists on what used to be easily called the left. We have the nationalists on what for now we'll call the right. You're pointing out, though, that in addition, there's the pro-change and the anti-change divide there.
Yeah.
But what do they have in common, other than specific policies, is the idea that central political power is the solution.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think the central political power is the solution, and it really becomes fascism more precisely when the cult of personality and the one strong man woman, right, is the way to do that. I mean, Trump and Sanders are a little bit different here, right? Because Trump has reached out and grabbed that, right, and embraced it and said, "I'm the guy, put me in charge. I'm a winner, right? America will win if I'm in charge." Sanders hasn't taken that on himself, but others are certainly putting it on him. That he has some. Bernie will save us, right, and let Bernie do it. And frankly, there's that same problem in the classical liberal movement with Ron Paul. There was anyway, right? A kind of cult of personality. I mean, granted, save us in the sense of somehow one man was going to, bring forward the glorious days of freedom. This reflects my skepticism of all politicians, Paul's included. But I think with Bernie, it comes more from his followers than him consciously wanting to embrace the role of the great man who will do this. I genuinely think Bernie Sanders is more modest, has more humility than that. Anybody has more humility than Trump, granted.
This sounds kind of like we're back to Mises saying that fascists slightly less evil.
Yeah, I think Bernie, Bernie, he's right next door in Vermont, so I've known, we've been aware of Bernie for a long time, right? So I'm willing in Bernie's case to grant that. I'm less willing to take him as intending evil. I have no problem with Trump, right? I think Bernie's just deeply misguided and naive in some real sense, right? And he, and he's just wrong about a lot of things. I mean, Trump's wrong about things too, but I don't, Bernie says dumb things. He doesn't scare me in quite the way that Trump does. And let me make another point about this too. I think, right? I was in a discussion with someone online in the last couple of days about this, but I actually think markets are so resilient that the damage even a Bernie Sanders presidency could do will at least be limited by the fact that this is the argument that Jeff Tucker and Max Borders made in the Freeman issue a while back. This sort of notion that we're in this world now where we can operate around the political and around the state much more easily than before. I think that's a really important and profound point, especially for anarchist-inclined libertarians. So the damage that Bernie can do by mucking with the economy, and he's not going to be able to, even if he's elected, he's going to face a Republican Congress. He's not going anywhere. But Trump, on the other hand, right, with the immigration stuff and with ISIS stuff, I mean, sort of all of this stuff, right, in terms of really turning us into something that looks more like Italy or Germany, and really does resemble fascism, especially with a Trump president and a Republican Congress. That's a lot more scary, and that's not so resilient in quite the same ways. So that's why ultimately Trump scares me more than Sanders. Although again, they share many of the same.
I mean, maybe it's to do with this cult of personality thing, but it seems like Trump attracts accusations of the F word much more often than Sanders. I mean, Sanders is also saying that he's a socialist all the time. Yeah, he's kind of framing himself that way.
Right, and it goes back to where we were before. I mean, Trump, so here's the little, kind of intellectual equation. Trump equals businessman equals free market equals right equals fascist, right? So. Right. And that's why, again, one of the most, I don't know how much traction it'll have, but if I were really wanted to muck around in this as a libertarian, I'd be doing what people play up Trump's crony capitalism type things, right? And then I'd stick the left with it too, right? I'd say, look, right, you don't like this guy. Why? He kicks old ladies out of their houses to build parking lots. Yes, that's not capitalism. That's corporatism. It's crony capitalism. It's what you on the left claim you oppose. So let's be clear about what's wrong with you. Why are you so mad at Trump, but you're okay with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and maybe even John Mackey, his politics aside, right? I mean, all the places you're happy to give your money and make people rich because they actually add value. Whereas Trump, Trump's gotten rich, and he hasn't even gotten that rich if you buy this stuff too, right? I mean, there's the great story about if he'd just taken his father's money and put it in a stock fund, he'd be wealthier than he is right now. So I don't think he's a very good businessman either. That's the one of the ironies here.
So I wanted to pick up on this precision question, and also really going back to the F word again, about fascism as National Socialism. So do you think it's accurate just to say that fascism is really just like a special variety of socialism? So is it like a subset, or are they like evil twin brothers, or what's the deal?
There's a great chapter in Hayek's Road to Serfdom called the Socialist Roots of Nazism, I think is the exact title of the chapter, right? I think so. And yeah, I mean, what fascism is the nationalist variant of socialism. I think that's the best way to put it. And because it puts nation first, as we were talking about before, it ends up to some degree softening the socialism by recognizing that at least the capitalists in the country have some role to play, right? We don't want to overthrow them. We want to co-opt them, right? Okay, and so it becomes, and then they while they're still capitalists or owners in name, in effect they're not, right? Because they're at the mercy of these cartels and of the leadership and the party in charge. So in that sense, it is a variant of socialism. There's no, I mean, you hear people on the left say things like, well, a truly free market would be fascist because corporations would have all the power. Okay, so the three of us can break that apart pretty easily, right? But one point I want to make is, well, no, the whole point of fascism was not to give corporations all the power, right? It was to share that power with the workers in the state, and that was the cartels. I mean, if I mentioned in the piece that we're talking about the New Deal programs in the United States, which shared some of these things, and that's what you saw there. Was we didn't get rid of the capitalists, we didn't give them all the power, right? But the NRA and the AAA brought the owners into these worlds where they had to collaborate, negotiate, and have their property rights strongly attenuated. So
was that a coincidence?
No. Because that we did that in the 30s.
Is it a coincidental comparison to fascism, or was there?
No, there was connections. Okay, so several. Everyone was looking for a third way, so it's not coincidental that they would come up with the similar kinds of ideas. But more importantly, see, and here's where the history is important. We hear Mussolini today, right? And right? Everyone, terrible Mussolini, right? Or we hear fascism today. But that word in the 20s and 30s, and Mussolini in the 20s and 30s, didn't turn everyone's intestines to liquid the same way it does today, right? It was another political system, and there were many people who admired Mussolini for having walked into Italy, taken power, and appeared to have created order out of chaos. Does this sound familiar, Mr. Trump? Right? And so you see people, I mean, FDR was a fan in some sense of Mussolini, and vice versa. Mussolini said of the New Deal programs, FDR is doing a variant of what we're doing here in Italy, right? And FDR and his advisors had looked to the Italians for inspiration. So yeah, it's not a coincidence. There's a historical connection there. And now, you're calling FDR fascist. Well, yes and no. I mean, okay. He was, right? This is John Flynn's When We Go Marching, right? That's the title of the Flynn book, right? Yeah. And this argument was made at the time that what Roosevelt was doing was no different from what was happening over there. The problem is now we look back, we hear fascist, we think Nazi, right? Right. Though, footnote, it was FDR that turned back the boatloads of Jewish refugees. So I have another Freeman piece from a couple years ago about FDR prosecuting the brothers. The case that brought down the NIRA was a case against kosher butchers, right, and was full of anti-Semitic tropes. So Roosevelt, he wasn't a Nazi, but he was no friend of the Jews, which raises another interesting set of questions too. So now we've totally digressed here, but yeah, there is a historical connection there. And that's going back to the earlier question, BK. That's why I think recovering that history enables us to try to use the F word in a meaningful way. The problem is that it's so burdened with what's happened since, that you start saying those things, and immediately no one can hear the argument. Right?
So if I can play devil's advocate for another round, what would you say to someone who says, well, there is a useful word and an accurate historical word to describe what you're talking about, and it's corporatism. At this point, fascism just means militarist racism. And when you call Trump, or especially if you call Sanders a fascist, right, it's assumed that that's what you're calling them.
Yeah, I don't. That argument isn't wrong, or isn't totally wrong. Anyway, right? I think there's. One, it's true that what we're talking about is corporatism. I think that's true. But I think, for me, corporatism is one piece of a larger thing that is fascism. And I think this is, again, where Trump and Sanders are different shades. Bernie's world is the corporatist world. It doesn't quite have the militarism and nationalism and racism, though one could argue, in effect, his immigration stance is, effectively racist, and he has supported the right wars, after all, right? So the correct wars. But I'll still grant that, right? Trump looks more like the prototypical fascist, right? The great man, the big rallies, Sanders too, but the sort of, the make America great again, right out of the fascist playbook. And it's more than just corporatism. It's the militarism. It's the I'm going to go kick people's ass. It's the view. It's the very clear view for Trump. The notion that the nation is a firm, and he's going to be the CEO, right? That's more than just sort of the corporate state partnership. That's the great man at the top of it. So I think, part of in writing that piece that we're talking about, I wanted to be the provocateur and really call it what it was. And again, Jeff Tucker's done some of this too, certainly with Trump. And I think it just it forces people to think by saying, what, Bernie Sanders is a fascist? What the hell does that mean, right?
The other problem I encounter with corporatism, to refer back to something you said earlier, is nobody knows what it means historically. They think it means let's give all the power to the corporation.
Yes, right. And I've been writing the Freeman pieces for so long that almost I have a running kind of joke in my head that anytime a topic comes up, I think to myself, I wrote a Freeman column about that somewhere. But yeah, there's one I have, I think, somewhere about the notion of power and how corporations get power. And in a market, all the power they have is power we've given them by buying their products. Apple is powerful.
And it's conditional, and it's temporary.
Yes, that's right. Apple's powerful, but IBM was powerful once too, right? And so was, Borders Books was powerful once, not so much anymore, right? So that, in that sense, I mean, this notion of sort of giving all power to the corporations, right? No, that's not what it's about. It's about the use of the political means, right? And as rather than the economic means of interacting, and the idea that resource allocation will take place through political decision making, not economic decision making. And certainly that's what we see. And it comes in, and the thing is about all this stuff, right? It comes in different flavors and varieties. And the Trump variation is one, the Sanders variation is another. And I think kind of looping back, seeing if the fascist label will stick or why people think it should stick is a useful intellectual exercise to really sort of shake us up and remind us what potentially we're dealing with here.
So if I can drop the devil's advocate for a moment, I want to latch on to a word you used earlier, which I think is really relevant to the conversation. You talked about the fascists co-opting the capitalists. Mm-hmm. And I think this idea of co-opting the powers that are in place is really important to the historical concept of fascism as we're looking at it beyond its connotations of militarism and racism. That revolutionary socialism has no problem saying we will eliminate anyone who earns their living from interest, for instance, and the historical fascists didn't have a problem saying they'd eliminate certain people, right? But to a large extent, what they were trying to do is co-opt people.
Yep, right.
And it seems to me that when you make a comparison between someone like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, one of the things we see in common between left and right is that very activity of co-opting the powers as they exist.
Yep. And which powers they want to co-opt differ because their issues differ, right? So it just cracks me up when my friends on the left point to they kind of get the cronyism, corporatism stuff, and they see it on the right, like, they bailed out the banks, they give them right, and then you turn around and say, Solyndra, right? Okay, because so much of the green movement is co-opting firms to do the political, to achieve the political ends. But those are the good ends. Okay, no, you can't beg the question here, right? It's the same phenomenon. Just because you happen to like those guys and not like those guys doesn't make it structurally different, right? Because all the people on the right are looking at that and saying the same thing. So
right.
So I think that's and again it's so who what are your ends and who do you perceive the relevant powers? But you're absolutely right, BK. That's what they both share, is that they are trying to reject the dynamism that is challenging their favored power holders. Maybe that's a way to generalize it. So yeah.
But can you say that again?
Yeah, they're trying to stop the dynamism that threatens
Gotcha.
their favored
Right.
power holders, right? So it's both sides think they know who the good guys are, and they want in the existing power structure who the good guys are, and want to save them against. So think about Uber, right? And who's defending the taxi cab? Here's Bernie, right? Defending
Right.
the taxi cab monopolies against Uber. Right? That's his favored group against people who. There's a real irony about this. I think I don't know if I did a Freeman piece. I know I did a Bleeding Heart Libertarians piece on this, but and a couple people pointed this out. Don Boudreaux had a piece on it too. The whole interesting thing about the Uber, call it the sharing economy, whatever we're calling it these days, is that all these people own their own means of production.
Right.
Right.
They are the Marxist dream.
They are the Marxist dream. Hello, and they control their hours, and no one, if you think about the whole debate over surge pricing, no one controls. They see market prices rising. They see 4 times surge in Uber. They get out of their house, go get their car in motion to make. What more? What production process capitalist production process has ever been less alienated and exploitive than that? Right? Yet, nonetheless, if you're a union guy, that's your favored power holder, and you're going to try to protect them against the challenges of dynamism.
So talking about this kind of co-opting, or sometimes I think of it as a sort of veneer of private enterprise that fascism tries to drape over it, I've been wondering if that difference between fascism and plain old revolutionary socialism is relevant economically. Like if you look at how economic stuff functioned under Mussolini, and you compare it to what's going on in the USSR at the same time, does that attempt to co-opt rather than destroy make a difference?
Yeah, I think it does, at least on the margin, right? You're not completely trying to eliminate the market and prices and profits and calculation and all the kinds of things, all the kinds of things these guys care about, right? Us guys care about. What you have with fascism is what Mises would have called, the kind of deep interventionism. You have a market, but it's so scrambled and hampered and interfered with. My good friend Pete Betke, uses the example of you have a great swimmer. Now you weight him down with weights, right? And all of a sudden he turns into a lousy swimmer, and you go, see, he's a lousy swimmer. No, he's not a lousy swimmer, right? So, but even a great swimmer with weights is going to beat me. Right? If you have, and think about our own economy right now, right? This is an interesting conundrum for libertarians. I would argue, my kids' lives will be better than mine. They will be richer. They will have more interesting things. They will have more stuff. It'll be a better life. despite the fact that we have $18 trillion of debt in an overweening state. That's just how resilient markets are, and that's how the powers of innovation and of the division of labor are just stronger than the powers of political stupidity. Now, that's not to say political stupidity doesn't slow them down. It does, right? If we never had the boom and the crisis of the last 15 years, my kids would be a lot better off than they're going to be, no question. But they're still going to be better off. And so I think what you have with fascism is you have a very hampered economy. There's still something of a market there. There's still, and if you look at the U.S. during the first New Deal, right? Things did not get worse after. There was some recovery. It was very minimal, and it took a long time, and there was a lot of different things going on. But it wasn't as if they'd gone to socialism where. Compare that to what happened in Russia from 1917 to 1921, where you really did eliminate all that stuff and production drops to zero. Okay, yeah. So, but the other part of this is in that hampered fascist economy, what you do have is screwed up signals and people be profiting by political connection. What you have is what Rand in my favorite chapter in Atlas Shrugged called the aristocracy of pull. Right? I mean, that's that phrase. If the woman never wrote anything else, aristocracy of pull and sanction of the victim are two of the greatest phrases in the history of the classical liberal movement. But aristocracy of pull is just it, right? Now you have this world in which you have the world of Frank Underwood in House of Cards, right? Where who you know and how you can manipulate the political process determines who gets resources, and then you can talk about some questions of justice and injustice with the veneer of markets over them, and that's why it's so terrible for classical liberals. Is it looks like a market in some weird ways, but it's completely upside down and inside out, and a whole bunch.
So to counter the argument that perhaps the fascists are slightly less evil, I heard an argument made by some self-identified left libertarians that I find compelling, which is that libertarians spend all of our time fighting socialism of the internationalist leftist variety. We argue with Marx constantly, but that war is over.
Yeah.
And that what we really have left is fascism of left-wing and right-wing varieties. And I asked you earlier whether or not the fascist label is useful. That is still a question for me when talking to the public at large.
Yeah.
But within the Liberty movement, it seems to me that one of the things that's most useful about it is trying to make exactly this point, that it's the fascists who are still here.
Right.
They are a more relevant opponent for us.
Yeah, and yes. And I think the thing that's, I guess the one caveat I'd put to that is I think there are some important underlying assumptions of the Marxian left that still go unchallenged, or still in pockets of the intellectual world are still there. And while people who adopt those assumptions aren't most of them aren't kind of hardcore eliminate the market, whatever, socialists, those assumptions drive their objections to markets in ways that are still relevant. When I look at my colleagues in the humanities, for example, who are, my colleagues at St. Lawrence are largely good people whose company I enjoy. They're very good teachers, but they share this set of Marxian assumptions about the world.
Like what?
Profit is zero. That markets are zero-sum game. So profit must mean if I profit, someone else loses. No conception of spontaneous order. That the world is either controlled by someone or some group, or it's chaos, right? And that's a kind. I mean, Marx was even smarter than that. At least Marx understood markets were spontaneous, or he just thought he could do better. Okay. The labor theory of value still exists in variety of forms, even though we never accept that from our students. But I spent so many hours writing this paper that we don't care, right? So it's some of that. I mean, they've learned it along the way, right? That's the only economics that they've been exposed to in any meaningful way. And part of that, of course, is because many classical liberals fear the humanities desperately and don't want to go anywhere near it, right? Which is why the work that Sarah does is the Lord's work, right? Because she's trying to bring each to the other, okay? Right. And so I think that's part of it. And so in that sense, I think we're still fighting. The ideas are still out there to be tangled with. But I think the other point is a good one, right? Which is the real enemies of liberty. That's not relevant, and certainly not in the United States. The real enemies of liberty are take different forms. The big enemies take different forms, and we should be paying more attention to it. And again, I think part of it is, and this is why the left libertarians tend to make this argument, is we're still, too many libertarians are stuck seeing themselves on the right, and therefore socialists are the enemy, but anyone who kind of vaguely sounds like they're on the right, we're not going to pay as much attention to. And then, well, I won't name names, but you can guess who we then wind up with as our, yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, interesting to see those changes in the form of the challenge that we face, without necessarily us adapting as quickly.
Well, right, yeah. Yeah.
So I want to start wrapping. Well, you go ahead, Stephen, then I'll do
a quick comment. Is the irony is, going back to BK's question and that follow-up, is the reason the left isn't the enemy anymore is that we actually won. We actually won. We won at the level of ideas. We did not win at the level of practical political institutions. Completely. Though, frankly, a full accounting of where we are today versus 30, 40, 50 years ago, in many ways the economy is actually freer than it was. Other ways it's not. It's a more complicated calculus than the kind of naive, or the quick but I think one of the weird problems with libertarians is we haven't been willing enough to claim victory in a certain sort of way, and then turn our attention to where the other concerns are. So I'll leave it there. Go ahead.
It's great. It's a great way to kind of get us going toward the end. So this has been a lot of fun. Dr. Horwitz, BK too, and everybody join us. Dave Haglin, antiwar.com's here. I bet that's Angela, but it might be somebody else.
If it's Angela, hi Angela.
So I'm going to start wrapping it up now to get it ready for the next show at the top of the hour. Mm-hmm. And the way I do a wrap-up is I'm going to tell everybody about a couple of Liberty.me shows that are coming up that you might enjoy. If you enjoyed this show, things you might like coming next. And then I'm going to tell you how to get more from Steve Horwitz and more from the Freeman. And then I'll turn it back over to Steve for the final word. Oh, yes, BK, do show off the magazine here for a moment.
It is beautiful.
It is. It is a stunning cover. And you guys, the fun thing is, if you're living in the hinterlands of civilization like I am in Canada, you can actually go and get the PDF right now for free from the Foundation for Economic Education. I'll put that link right in there in the comments. And also, you can go and subscribe if you want to get the print edition, just like BK's got. And my print edition is coming to me, but it's probably.
I just got mine today, as a matter of fact.
Oh, there you go. You guys can go and subscribe right here to go and get the print edition in your two little hands 4 times a year. Okay, so I did it backwards that I said I would. So now I'm talking about where you can get more Freeman. Let me tell you, we can get more from Steve Horwitz specifically. We haven't talked about it enough on the show tonight, but Steve has a great new book out called Hayek's Modern Family, Classical Liberalism and the Evolution of Social Institutions. Okay, I admit I'm prejudiced. I have not read the book yet, but I strongly suspect it's great, and I'm eager to get my own greedy little hands on it. So I'll let you guys see the Amazon link for that. It is so far a pricey book, but we are hoping for the arrival of a more affordable paperback and ebook in the near future. Steve also blogs very regularly on, if you put together his Freeman stuff, but also bleedingheartlibertarians.com. You get tons of Steve Horwitz there, and coordinationproblem.org is another place to get Steve Horwitz. He also has a regular Freeman column, like he mentioned. There's about 1 million of them now. And here's his most recent column. It's called 3 Kinds of Economic Ignorance. And surprise, surprise, he's going after Sanders there. So that's all those different places you can get more from Steve Horwitz specifically. I also want to make sure you guys know where to get more from BK Marcus. BK is the new editor of the Freeman. And so, of course, you can see lots of him over at fee.org. But specifically, I want you guys to see one of my very favorite BK Marcus articles ever, How Ice Cream Won the Cold War. It's fun. It's got, you can imagine. It's fun. It's got frozen treats. It's got dictators. It's got everything you could want. Okay, so now I'm going to close up by talking about 2 upcoming shows on Liberty.me, and then I really will turn it over to Steve. So coming up in just about 5 minutes now, we have Lucy Steigerwald's show, Politics for People Who Hate Politics. Her topic tonight is Cowboys and Guns, and she's focusing on the very complicated Oregon standoff still ongoing. and she and her stalwart panel are going to talk about the standoff, the new executive order from Obama on firearms, and also they always make sure they're going to talk about something that isn't politics that they did enjoy last week, thinking about kind of getting out of the circus, thinking about things we can enjoy today. And so that's something that's coming up tonight. And something else you might enjoy that's a little more even outside the box is the Liberty Classics show. So Jeffrey Tucker does a Liberty Classics show every Sunday on Liberty.me Live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And usually he grabs a great classic book, Mises' Omnipotent Government or Hayek's Road to Serfdom. This week he's doing something a little bit different, and his show tonight, or this weekend, is called Music and Politics at the Dawn of Modernity. And he's going to kind of meditate on the interactions of music, our ability to express ourselves through our consumption of pop art, and the kind of sort of comparison between that and our limitations in the political theater. So I encourage you guys to check that out. I'm really looking forward to that one too. Okay, so now I've finally done all my promotional work, and I get to turn it back over to Steve for the final word.
I'll add 2 brief promotions to that. For those of you who don't follow me on Facebook, you're not really a libertarian if you don't follow me. My personal page is full at 5,000 friends, but you still can follow me. I also have a public figure page. That's actually the best way to keep track of what I'm up to, both professionally and otherwise. So that's a good place to go. And for the folks who are Students for Liberty folks, I will be at ISFLC in February as part of the fees, one of fees panels there. So if you're going to ISFLC, you should come to that, and you should say hi and introduce yourself. I am always happy to chat. So, and thank you guys for this. This was great. This is a fun conversation, and anytime, have me back.
Great, thanks, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'll see you all again soon on Liberty.me Live.
Thanks very much.
Take care.